What's golden, y'all? It's Brian back with this week's live stream of the Blurting While Dad live stream slash podcast. You're going to start seeing this pop up on Spotify. I did have a podcast back in the days for Long Boxing While Black, and when I was establishing that as its own individual brand, and so that was on Spotify too. So I don't know if we're ever going to see these things intersect because um, I was paying an arm and a leg for hosting, and I realized that at the time it wasn't necessarily for me because I couldn't fully commit to the concept of uh, producing content every single week. I had a good run for about a year, and then life started lifing. So this week we're going to follow up on the conversation we had last week about my ADHD journey, and it's kind of at the request of some folks on TikTok who wanted me to talk a little bit more about being um, a 90s era black kid who grew up with ADHD at a time where black kids weren't really allowed to have ADHD. Um, and just my experiences and stuff. And so I just kind of talk about my journey with it, and kind of the maddening part of finding out after the fact that it was a secret that everybody kind of knew except me. By the time I got my official it turned out to be my re-diagnosis as an adult. Apparently, I'd been diagnosed as a child, and nobody decided to tell me that I had ADHD. Fun times. So we're picking up where we left off last week. It's not a reset. This is kind of a continuation of that conversation about the ADHD conversation. But this is what happens when people don't explain you, then they expect you to function anyway. Like they don't explain things to you, but they want you to continue to function. And so I'm gonna jump into the ADHD thing, but also I'm gonna talk about um I did promise y'all I'm gonna start rereading The Dark Tower. This time, instead of, because I've read the drawing of the three a couple of different times, this time I'm actually going through the ebook version because I can do a lot of it by memory, but there's specific nuances that I like with well presented ebooks where there's character inflection and accents and stuff like that, and I can pick up on nuances that I couldn't necessarily pick up on from the reading side of things. And so I'm kind of give you my reflections of that, and then we're going to talk about and this is going to be this is going to piss people off. I don't care. We're going to talk about white leftism and how it intersects with leftism when it's not centered on white folks. And so we're going to talk about some of the clashes that I've encountered online and some of the nuances of political theory when it comes to dealing with multiple populations and stuff like that. All right, cool, cool. I'm gonna get back to the comic book stuff next week. DC is kind of reset and it's kind of gone back to the boring baseline after DCKO. I know they're trying to rehab Superboy Prime and kind of give him a redemption story. I want to see how that goes. Um, but I'm scared that DC is going to end up losing my interest after capturing me. And normally they end up losing me with crossover events. I'm gonna keep a buck with you. Like this last crossover event was pretty dope, and so they captured my attention in a way that they hadn't really in years. And so I'm really hoping that they're able to continue on this path, but they ain't off to a great start right now. And I have a feeling that Marvel is kind of heading that way too, because they got another event coming up this summer. Um, is it Armageddon or something along those lines? And we'll see what happens with that. So anyway, this is the ADHD conversation. Um, so everybody kind of knew that I operated differently, and I was kind of on my own operating system. Um, you know, and when I was little, I was kind of my story is not unique by any stretch of the imagination, y'all. It's not unique. Um, I ended up in the gifted section of whatever, right? And so I was in gifted classes, and it spent all these people telling me how smart I was and stuff like that. And it was all good until I actually had to start applying myself, and then I started feeling like the dumbest guy in the room. That was kind of my ADHD journey when I was little. So let's get started. When I was little, um, and this is coming from other this is like coming from my mom and stuff. I was nonverbal. I was nonverbal. I didn't hit any of my speech milestones. And I mentioned this last week, but they started kind of preparing her for a life. And understand, guys, again, this is 80s talk. Okay. So just don't kill me right now. This is 80s talk. My mom started having to prepare, started having to prepare. They tried to start preparing her for a life with a kid that was handicapped. 80s talk, right? They said I was mute. Um, and um, I didn't hit my speech milestones. I could make noises and stuff like that, but I really didn't start really talking or communicating. Um, when they expected me to, more or less. And so they start preparing her for a life with the kid that was disabled and whatnot. And then one day, around three, halfway, about three and a half, I just started talking in full sentences. And there was no delay in my verbs, in my words. In fact, I was kind of ahead in terms of what they thought, and it shocked people because specifically I had a babysitter at the time, and um, one day I just started talking, and it just kind of blew them away because they're so used to me not talking and not saying anything. And I was an early reader, a little smarty pants. I skipped kindergarten essentially. Um, I was in Montessori. I skipped kindergarten, went straight to first grade. And so now I'm a kid who had some kind of different neurological programming. Um, you know, and again, I didn't know that I had ADHD diagnosis. I didn't know any of that stuff. But different neurological programming, and now I'm also a year younger than all of my classmates. You can see the direction this is going, right? Um, Black kid in the 80s. Now, here's the thing. My mom was educated, and she was a nurse. And by the time I had gone through high school, she was working on finishing her master's. And she went into epidemiology, super intelligent person, things along those lines. In her world, um, when I got diagnosed as something different with my brain, um, she put made every effort to show the world that I was normal as possible, and that meant not uh, sharing my diagnosis with the school. And there was a specific reason why. In my school district, if you were specifically a Black kid, you ended up getting tracked into remedial courses if you had any kind of um, any kind of neurodivergence. You were tracked into remedial classes. And she saw that pathway, she worked in the school system, she saw that happen to a lot of kids. And it was something she even mentioned to me in passing, um, because she was a school nurse, and I went to school where she was. It just happened to end up landing like that. um, and there was a white kid who was on Ritalin back then, and he came in every day and got his Ritalin, and that was kind of his daily midday dose. And she just kind of offhanded remarked, like, he's a nice kid, but he gets the benefit of having that. She's like, I know a lot of Black kids that could use that Ritalin, but um, if they got that diagnosis, and I think she might have been talking to me, if they got that, they wouldn't be able to participate in a lot of the regular school functions. They wouldn't be on a graduation track, is what I'm saying. I'm rambling a little bit because I'm off my notes. Um, and so she had the education. She knew what ADHD looked like. And I had the diagnosis. And the decision was really influenced by the reality that Black kids faced in American school systems in larger cities. Um, and it could be in smaller cities. I don't know if it was confined, but um, basically she knew I had ADHD and didn't say anything. And the reason why was because I was smart enough to not, and I have inattentive ADHD. So my day is just daydreaming. Like, it was daydreaming in class. I don't remember a lot of learning in school. It was just me drifting off, and then me being good enough to come in and bang out the tests and get good grades and shit like that. Um, oh wow. So I N word. Goodbye. Um, and so yeah, don't bring the, and I can put the chat, like I can put the chat on the screen or whatnot. Don't step in my Some of my shit with hi nigga, bro. Like, come on, bro. Give me a break. Um, so anyway, essentially I had ADHD. Like I said, I didn't have to pay attention when all the way pretty much through 11th grade. I could not, I could just sit there and zone out in class and come in and ace the test. And then around 11th grade, that's when it started getting a little bit tricky for me. And I actually started having to pay attention. And that's where my grades started slipping a little bit. And again, my mom had the ADHD diagnosis. She didn't say anything. And so I experienced this entire thing. Now imagine being told how brilliant and smart and everybody, you know, your teachers talking about how smart you are, how gifted you are and everything. And then one day you hit a wall where your intelligence cannot overcome your output. And it started around 11th grade. And by that time, my grades were enough where I could just not turn in homework assignments through most of the quarter. And I would just spend like 2 weeks feverishly working at the end of the quarter and turn everything in and get my grade up to a B. And so that was good enough to land me an academic scholarship. Okay. Um, Again, this was my mom protecting me, y'all. I don't want to come across like I'm no, she was working off the knowledge she had. She knew that if I came in with the ADHD diagnosis, she would have to fight like hell um, to make sure that I didn't get warehoused because I've seen what those remedial classes were. And in the 90s, they were where a lot of my peers who aren't any like I'm not any smarter than them, but somehow they got tracked into those classes and it was like getting warehoused in a lot of cases. You didn't They weren't given opportunities that was. I wasn't, you know, I tested out of college, a lot of college entry level college stuff just based on the classes I took in high school and stuff. And a lot of my peers had a harder path who did land in that remedial track. And a lot of it was behavioral. Like it wasn't even intelligence wise, it was behavioral. You know, they had the ADHD that you couldn't mask, right? They had other neurological things that they couldn't mask. And because they couldn't mask them, instead of addressing them and educating them at grade level, they dropped them down to remedial and just warehoused them until some dropped out or they graduated. But still, and then when they got into college, they had to take a bunch of other courses to catch up. It was crazy work. And so that was the track that was the decision my mom made. And so I went through my entire adolescence and young adulthood not knowing that I had active ADHD diagnosis. And it worked for a while. Um, I ended up going to college on an academic scholarship, on an engineering scholarship, and um, I ended up tricking that scholarship off because now I'm in college and I actually have to study. I have to actually lock in on boring ass subjects that I have no interest in whatsoever. I was in construction engineering. I had never done any construction or anything. So I'm in intro to construction, learning actual construction. And my brain would not connect with it. It was super boring. The thing that my brain was connecting with was my sociology classes. I found a passion to work in broadcasting. I worked in the radio station for 4 years. I was on the station management team. Um, and so I was in college radio. I spent most of my time, you know, doing the college radio thing, talking to A&Rs, A&Rs, oh my God, talking to record labels and A&Rs and stuff, and just doing my radio show on things like that. And that's where my scholarship went. I ended up losing my scholarship because I could not study. I didn't have the capacity to go lock in and sit in the library and pound through books that I did not find interesting. But abnormal psychology, I could ace that class because that stuff was fascinating to me. And so um, I ended up bombing out of my scholarship. And hey, just joined the stream. Welcome. um, So right now I'm kind of giving the rundown of my kind of ADHD journey, and how it was kind of shaped my childhood and young adulthood and stuff. So stick around if you want to see how I've done that and turned into basically a business owner with a couple of different businesses. Um, and a decent a life that allows me to create, which I'm pretty happy with. And I got a venture that may interest some nerds if you guys are interested at the end of this thing. I struggle with ADD, so I know the feeling. Yeah. And so my thing was, my mom knew and she never told me. And part of the reason was, when I was growing up, if you were a black kid and you had ADHD, you got dropped in remedial courses. Like it was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I was college bound, and she knew that that would derail any opportunity for me to get into a college and get access to scholarships and things along those lines. So, but then I got to college and actually had to try. And I did not have the capacity or bandwidth to do it. And so I failed a bunch of college courses. And it wasn't failed because I couldn't do the work. It was failed because the work was so uninteresting and so unengaging. I was like, I would have A's in classes I was interested in and F's and D's in classes I did not care about. And there was no real middle ground. So I get through college. My mom now is riding me like, "Oh, you're just being lazy. You're not putting in the effort and stuff like that." And it was a weird, almost like, but and I had to go back and say, why did you knew I had ADHD this entire time, but why were y'all so mean about my grades and stuff and acting so disappointed and kind of browbeating me about this stuff? And her take on it was, since I had gotten so good at masking my ADHD and just making grades happen and doing shit really well, she knew it was something I had, but she thought I had some level of control over it. And I got to being a 30-year-old adult working a case management job with an impossible paperwork load and having to pay attention to all kinds of details and feeling like I was losing my mind. And, shotgunning Red Bull after Red Bull after Red Bull just to get through my day and maintain the focus of a job that was already impossible due to paperwork, and feeling like I was losing my mind. And it came across, actually, I happened to be at home one weekend, uh, dreading having to go in the next day, like absolutely dreading it, holding my daughter. Um, actually, I think I was probably holding my son, and kind of dreading going in. No, it was my daughter because right before my son was born, dreading going to work, like having a panic attack about going to work that next day and getting ready for the next week. Um, and I tell people like that job was stressful to the point where if I was walking across the street, I would close my eyes, just hoping that a car would swipe me so that I could go rest. Um, so, all right. So she wasn't trying to set me up. Um, in her mind, and understand this is in her mind, here's what was happening. So initially it started out as it was something she thought I could just willpower my way through because I actually did it. Like I did fine without having my diagnosis acknowledged until I was like in 11th grade. And then it slowly started going downhill at that point. Um, but what happened was the reason why she didn't really acknowledge, like she didn't have my diagnosis acknowledged, was because in the 90s, if you were neurodivergent as a black kid, you got dropped into the remedial classes, and that was it for your career. Like you were done. College was not a possibility for you because you would not be in the classes that get you the credits that would qualify you for college. And she knew it. And she experienced it because she worked in the school system. She's seen it happen so many times. And so that's why there was never any diagnosis. Now, as I got older, I think it became an out of sight, out of mind thing where she's like, "Oh, he's fine. He'll be okay." And so I'm holding my son, um, 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 like dreading it. And on PBS, a show came on called "Is It You, Me, or the ADHD?" And it was about adults with ADHD. And I sat there and watched it, and it felt like they were like narrating my life. And so I kind of brought it up. Um, I kind of brought it up in passing to mom. And she's like, "Oh yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna check it out." Um, now I think that in her mind, and when I asked her about it, she's like, "I thought you already knew you had ADHD. Like, I thought you knew that. I thought that was just something you knew." No, I didn't. So I actually went and got diagnosed after seeing that. And initially, the doctor, like the attending, because there was attending and there was a resident. I saw the psych resident, and the psych resident is like, "Oh yeah, you got the ADHD." Then the attending, sight unseen, decided that I was drug seeking and put me on a bunch of tranquilizers. So, after that negative experience, because the attending put me on a bunch of tranquilizers, that was the first step. They're like, "Well, he has anxiety." So, and I'm like, "I have anxiety because I have a job that I'm about to get fired at because I cannot string together my brain to focus on these tasks right now, and I'm underwater." And they're like, "Well, you have anxiety, so here's a bunch of tranquilizers." And um it kinda came out because I thought that these meds were supposed to be ADHD meds. They didn't really tell me what they were, and I took them, and I'm like, "I feel weird," and I had court that day. I had to take one of my families to court, and um we're closing out their case. Like, I've been working on this case, getting all the safety issues addressed, and getting everything addressed so that we can bring these kids back home and close the case out. And I was on the medication that this psych doctor had given me, and my brain would not connect with my words. And so I called my mom when I got home and I said, "Hey, these are the meds." And she asked me to read her the meds, and she's like, "That's a tranquilizer, Bry." And she's like, "All right." And that's kind of where it came out a little bit like, "Yeah, we've known that you had ADHD." And then she kind of used her resources to get me a referral to a nurse that worked with adult that specialized in adult ADHD. That's where I got actual medication and help. Right. So I'm gonna go with, okay, hold on. Nowadays you can get in college easier with ADHD. The lower standards for you. Almost 40% of students has a disability of some sort. They don't lower the standards for you. They give you accommodations, specifically like if you have a reading disability or something along those lines. They give you extra time. They give you the time you need to actually do the thing. Uh, and you still have to make the grade. Like, you still have to pass the test. You still have to make the grade, but they give you more time to actually complete the thing. Um, I can't remember what meds they put me on. Like I said, my mom, and I can't call her because my mom passed in 2016. Um, but it was a tranquilizer. It was super anti-anxiety, but she's like, they're taking a sledgehammer to a gnat, essentially, a gnat of a problem. And it was, like I said, finding this getting in touch after that, I kind of wrote a letter to that doctor and said, it is frustrating that I came in for help and you saw what I needed, but your attending who had never met me and everything decided I was drug seeking and decided to put me on tranquilizers. And all I needed was help. I didn't care if you put me on Strattera. I didn't care. Non-stimulant, stimulant. I'm just looking for help. And you put me on tranquilizers. And so at this point, I'm gonna go with somebody else. And so they put me on the psych nurse, and the psych nurse started me on Vyvanse, and that was kind of my journey. And so, and the joke is, with Vyvanse, you take Vyvanse for ADHD and find out you're autistic. That's kind of that's the effect Vyvanse kind of hits you with. And so I have my own misadventures with that medication because the medication management was a little bit wonky because the nurse I ended up with ended up actually leaving and going to another city. And so I ended up getting transferred. And so uh, the way that the psych nurse had me, where she was kind of tracking the side effects of the medication, it kind of got jumbled in the mud. And I didn't really have a good perspective on what stimulant medication could do and what it couldn't do. And so, long story short, I was on the highest dose of Vyvanse that was allowable or permissible, and it turned me into a zombie for a while. It was not great to not be able to solve. Yeah, that's what it was. It was, and so I was doing case management, and so this job was stressful to a point that experienced case managers, like the young lady sitting next to me, ended up having a mental health crisis at her desk. It was terrifying. And this job was that level of impossible. I could come in, put in a 16-hour day, and do all the tasks I had on my calendar, still not be any closer to having any stopping point or being done. It was bad because the state had decided to privatize our child care system. to push all the union workers out, and then they took all of their responsibilities and folded them into one job. So I was doing like four people's jobs at the same time with no training. It was bad. And so um, that job was stressful to that point, and the precision that you need to keep track of paperwork and things along the line was crazy. Um, and here's the thing: so where I'm at, if you when I was doing the case management thing, if you had a family and there was a sibling strip, that means multiple siblings, you had to go see every single sibling in that family every single month. Now that doesn't sound like a big deal until you get to where you have eight siblings and they live in five different states, and you still are on the hook to see them. And that was the kind of work that was required. Now, fortunately, I was on the juvenile justice side of things where it was kids that were on probation. So most of my day was split between ungodly amounts of paperwork and uh finding out where my probation kids were and chasing them down and keeping them out of jail, making sure they were going to school and stuff. And so it was kind of a balance, but it was still a very, very difficult job. Yep. Generally for kids, they use a stimulant for ADHD. Yeah, they put me on a stim. I The entire story was I was diagnosed when I was little, but my mom never um pass forward my diagnosis, and a lot of it had to do with the racial dynamics of where we lived, because the school system had a bad habit of taking black kids who had any kind of neurodivergence instantly, without any kind of assessment or anything, just dropping you into remedial classes. And a lot happened to a lot of my friends, and so she worked in the school system. She's like, "That's not going to happen to my son," and so that's kind of what it was. No, that the Vyvanse is gone. Like that was years and years ago. That Vyvanse, the dose was so high. I think it was the right medicine, but one, I already had some blood pressure issues that I was kind of born with, and so Vyvanse was not great for me. And two, I was on such a high dose that it turned me into an actual zombie. Um, and so it allowed me to be a robot, focused on task, but not much else. It ripped all of my other emotions out of me. And so I ended up cold turkeying that, just to save interpersonal relationships along those lines. But then at the same time, that's when I kind of changed jobs and got out of that case management thing, and started doing something else. But as it stands right now, my combo is, I think, it's Wellbutrin, which has been like a miracle for me with my ADHD. Like it's been Wellbutrin has been the thing that I've needed, for my inattentive ADHD. It still allows me to keep the quirkiness and the creative side of my personality, but allows me to lock in and focus during the daytime hours when I need to do stuff to maintain my businesses. It's been kind of a godsend for me. So um let me see where I'm at. So I don't blame my mom for it. The thing I do have questions is like once you realize that the ADHD was actually a hindrance to me, my question would be, why did you allow me to continue on that path? Because I was young adult by that point. Um, and to hear, well, we knew you had it, like when at 30 years old, after I had been struggling and I'd struggled in college, and I had formed such a low opinion of myself and my intelligence and my ability to do things. To hear this now was really kind of a punch in the gut. And a lot of it had to do with 80s era, 90s era understanding of neurodivergence and how these things worked. I mean, that's really what it is, y'all. Like it is really tethered to the era that you grew up in, because there are a lot of autistic people in the 50s and 60s, that they never got help, and so they were either left to sink or swim. Some of them ended up getting, what was it? I forgot what it was. Where some of them ended up getting drafted into the military because they lowered the requirements and put them in the military. It was kind of a soft eugenics play. But the era you grew up in really determines how people address your neurodivergence. That's real. So, um, So I understood not telling me as a kid, but I didn't understand not telling me when I got to college. Like I wish she would have said, "Yeah, Brian, the reason why you're struggling is possibly the ADHD thing, and maybe we can go get you some help." Because I feel like if that was the case, my life could have taken a little bit of a different track. Because I played the game of life on hard mode in college, bro. Like, um, I had bombed out a lot of my classes, but I stayed in school so I can go to the things that interested me, like sociology, abnormal psychology, some math classes, and some science classes and stuff. But the thing that really kept me engaged was working in the radio station. And I'm old enough to where we were one of the first radio stations that was on the internet. And had I had the fortitude to stick with it and had the ability to stick with it, we would have been podcasting because we were doing basic podcasting on an early internet radio. I just wish that she could have told me when I was in college so I could actually get some help and assistance. But yeah, I don't have any leftover Vyvanse, man. That stuff we I turned that in a long we destroyed that a long time ago. Um let's see where we at. So um as I got older, and I think there's a gap that I left out between me graduating, me dropping out of school and going to actual work. I worked in group homes and I worked with teenagers and stuff, and that work aligned with what my mental capabilities were because I didn't have to focus on one thing for too long. I could shift priorities and I could split my attention between five different crises at the same time and address all of them. And so I really excelled at working in the group home environment. And because of that, the ADHD diagnosis kind of got sidelined for a while too, because I got really, really good at working in residential care environments because my mind was attuned to that. I could shift from this kid's having a mental breakdown, crisis, screaming, yelling, crying. I can address that, pivot. I need to cook dinner, pivot. It's time to hang out with the kids, take them up to the field house to play basketball, pivot, bedtime routine, pivot. And so it was really structure based, and that worked for my brain. And I held on to that job. And so that kind of uh, put off the ADHD diagnosis for a while because I was excelling at that job. And when I decided, hey, it's time to go get a grown up job, that's when I slid into case management. And that's when I realized, hey, my brain ain't wired the same. I kind of knew it the entire way, but it really exposed all my weaknesses on in that regard. Okay. And it got bad to the point before I got my diagnosis, I actually thought I was losing my mind because I'd grown up, everybody had told me how smart I was. And I apologize if I'm rambling, guys. I'm at the end of my medication if you haven't been able to tell. It's a little bit later than I normally get started streaming. I thought I was actually losing my mind because in my mind I was supposed to be this highly accomplished person because of the child, being the gifted child and all this other stuff. I thought I was supposed to be this highly accomplished person, and I struggled so mightily and watched people that um watch people that I didn't think they were smarter than me, but at the time I'm like, well, maybe I'm just an idiot. I watched them navigate through college and be able to do the typical adult thing that you do in college and be able to focus, and I was not able to do that. And no amount of discipline could get me in there. I was disciplined with radio work. I was disciplined with showing up for meetings for the radio and making sure my show got on time and making sure that we did the charting and stuff and reporting to all of our charts and things along those lines. Like I was on top of that stuff because I loved doing it. But if it was a boring class, I was not locked in at all. So I thought, so by the time I got done group homework and pivoted into more of a traditional office job, I thought I was going insane. And that's why, to be honest with you, that seeing Is It You, Me, or the ADHD on PBS was so clutch because that was the thing that provoked me to go back and actually get a diagnosis and uncover the fact that yes, I have been diagnosed with ADHD in the past. I just never knew and never got treatment for it. So um like I said, that environment, the group home environment rewarded quick thinking, attention shifting, but the transition to case management was absolutely brutal. Okay. It was absolutely brutal. Like I've always been a great writer. Like that's always been my strong point. I'm terrible at spelling, but I've always been a really good writer. That was something I've been published before when I was little. One of the things I do, I've ghostwritten books for people and things along those lines. Like I've always been strong at writing, like fiction stuff. Um, but like technical writing is not my strong suit. I can write marketing stuff, but I can't write technical writing. Okay. And so I realized I was kind of misaligned, and not necessarily um, in the job that I needed to be in. Okay. And some environments make you look competent, others make you question everything about yourself. And that's what the environment I was dropped into when I finally got my diagnosis. That was a lesson, y'all. And like I said, for me, I had to stumble around in the dark until I found the pathway that made sense for me. Um, in hindsight, here's the thing. So, my career trajectory was dropped out of college to get a job to help support my mom who had gotten sick, and take care of myself. Found a career, but I abandoned the career that I wanted. So I abandoned my career in broadcasting to go get a real job. And when I like we had gotten job offers, other stations around the country, and I was planning on dropping out of school, and taking, taking one of these radio jobs and then re-enrolling once we got settled. And essentially, my family had intervention on me and saying, "Radio's a pipe dream," and blah blah blah. I was like, "But I'm getting job offers for this right now," and the job offers I was getting for the radio, in hindsight, were bigger than the job offers I landed with my real job. Go figure. So anyway, they talked me out of it. I ended up getting the real job and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed group home working. I enjoyed working with kids and families and stuff. And I ended up getting a career out of it. But dropped out of school, went into group home residential care and worked and matriculated my way up through the ranks there. Um, and then took a hard pivot because I'm like, I don't want to work evenings my entire life. I want to be able to spend the evenings with my kids. My wife was pregnant at the time, and I'm like, and um, I applied for another job, and it was a case management job, and I got it. And I didn't know that the state was about to turn that case management job into something impossible to attain. So I took that, had my day job, and that's where my ADHD squarely kicked me right between the shoulder blades. Said, "Hold still, real quick." It sized me up and then kicked me right, it punted me right between the shoulder blades. Um, and that's where the ADHD bit me. And so I ended up getting medicated while I was doing the case management job and was able to survive in that job long enough to get promoted at the place I had previously been and basically establish and build my own shelter program for kids that were coming out of uh, heavy duty lockup. Like these are like juvenile felons, and it was staff secure detention, alternative detention kind of shelter. And I ran that to the best of my ability, over medicated with ADHD drugs. And my house ran like a well oiled machine. And it was at the cost of me being over medicated for ADHD, like taking doses of Vyvanse that are way too high. Um, but I made that work and parlayed that job into a job managing family support workers, um, and doing actual family support work and kind of mentoring the next group of people that engaged with families. And then after that, I ended up landing a director's position at another agency. And like I did all this with ADHD on and off meds. And so one of the things is, and one of the complexes I realized, one of the things I was struck with was I have a lot of really solid accomplishments in my career and I've achieved a lot. I tell people by the time I was 35, I had reached pretty much I reached the peak of what I could do in my career field, um, as a bachelor's level person. Like I was a director, I was a couple seats away removed from the executive suite. Um, I had doctoral candidates and stuff. Like I was hiring and firing master's level and doctoral level candidates and stuff just because I had the raw experience that they did not have. But I was doing that work, managing this, meeting with, going out and sitting down and meeting the movers and shakers in the state and whatnot, representing my agency and whatnot. And then my mom died, and that drew all of the reserve that I had in terms of being able to manage staff and all that stuff. It just took it out of me, and I had to walk away from that because I did not have all the wells of my compassion went away. And I told my workers, you never, when you get burnt out working with kids and families, you need to go find something else to do for a while because the decisions that you make last forever and you're going to affect these families forever. Your bad day is going to can impact this family for 18 years. And so I had to take my own advice. I had reached my burnout threshold, and so I went and did something else. And so that's when I decided to go try my hand at being a business owner. And I've had moderate success doing that. Not quite where I want to be, but it is what it is. But yeah, it was my ADHD journey. I wish I would have known when I was little. And I could get into like nuances of going to school and knowing that I was different, things like that. Like I could highlight different aspects of that. But um, one of the challenging parts was um, even the acceptance. Like it was weird, the acceptance of my brain being completely wired differently and finally getting help from for my ADHD, but then other people, encountering peers and elders and stuff, and saying, "Yeah, I got diagnosed with ADHD," and oh, well, don't use that as an excuse. You can't use that as an excuse. Like it wasn't an embrace of it wasn't embracing, hey, I figured out what's wrong with my brain and I'm getting help for it. It was, oh, don't use that as an excuse. Ugh, yuck. Like that's how I got treated initially. Because, specifically, you know, and I don't want to say it's not just isolated to any one community or whatnot, but you know, like I said, when you are a black kid in the 80s, you were not allowed to have ADHD. You was just a bad kid. You was a bad, undisciplined kid who needed enough whoopings to get yourself on track. And that's how you got presented. And so going back as a black adult and getting diagnosed with ADHD or getting re-diagnosed with ADHD, I thought that the reception would be a little bit kinder, and it was not at all. In fact, people it was almost like a weird steering kind of thing, like, ugh, so like, you saying that's the reason why, and so it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but at least I got the help from me. So it is what it is. Again, I could talk and riff about the ADHD thing, and I could talk about being a parent and stuff. So I have other topics to go with ADHD, but people ask me to expand a little bit on my experience with it, and I can. I probably need to do it when I'm a little bit more locked in and focused. Right now, my brain is going, and so I'm going to the next part of my outline. um, we're going to talk about class and race. And we're going to talk about white leftism online. Okay. Um, and here's the thing. Um, if I had to define my politics, my politics on paper put me as firmly in leftist space. I lean left. I'm not switching sides. I'm not shifting stuff up. But my engagement, like I'm firmly left. Like that's what, and I don't even like defining it like that. It's just who I am and what I believe. I don't really identify in that political ideology space, but I know that um the race and politics are tethered together, they're tied together. And depending on where I'm at, me being black in a space that I'm not expected to be black in or expect to be president, my presence alone makes my existence a political statement. It is what it is, especially in the nerd space. um I'll throw this out here, like the nerd space specifically. So I'm gonna tell you how it works. If you have a comic book with no black people, it's just a comic book. But if you have a comic book with no white people, you're making a political statement, and that's how it runs. So anyway, my politics, I lean left. I'm not switching sides or anything, but this is about behavior online of online white leftists. And I'm really delineating, I'm really saying online white leftists because there are white leftists that are actually out in the trenches doing things. And then there's these online folk. And these the online white leftists, they will talk to you crazy. And I'm jumping way ahead. Um, and so a lot of times they will try to break it down and hit you with a bunch of theory and this, that, and the third. Try to beat you over the head with Marx. I wasn't huge in Marx. I understand. I know a lot of his theories and stuff. I wasn't huge in Marx. I mean, I got the vibes of weird. He was anti-slavery, but there's some weird racial shit that kind of tends some of the shit. But the push for class first analysis devoid of uh, analyzing race is kind of a non-starter for me. And what happens is when I'm engaging white leftists online, y'all talk a lot of shit. Like y'all pop off, bro. Like y'all pop off. Y'all don't like being challenged on any of your things. You talk crazy to people online. And I don't know if it's just the hyper online person that has a strong political ideology thing, but like I, and I'm not picking on Hassan because I know that everybody's been dogpiling on Hassan, but there's a reason why I don't really watch a lot of Hassan content, bro, because Hassan be talking crazy to folk, bro. And I'm from a place where if you say some of the stuff that he says to people on a daily basis, like there's clips I've seen where he's telling somebody to suck his dick and all this other crazy shit, you would absolutely get backhanded. Like you wouldn't survive a backhand. And I'm just keeping it real. That is the level of engagement that a lot of his fans and a lot of other people in adjacent spaces who may not be in his fan base. I've seen a lot of white leftists do that online. They'll talk crazy to you. Tone shifts as soon as you start pushing and saying, well, this doesn't, this policy that you're advocating doesn't really seem to have any space for black people. Where are we at in this? They get combative. They'll talk shit to you, bro. Like, it's crazy. And so my point is this: if I can't engage with you and have slightly differentiated opinions without you blowing up the spot, and you're a bot, you're a fucking shill, you're a shit lib, you're a rad lib, and all that other stuff. If I can't minimally engage with you without you just starting to get into all that popping off stuff, we can't be in coalition together. We can't, there's no solidarity there. Listen, y'all, and I don't tell a lot of people this, but I'm comfortable telling potentially billions of strangers, so go figure. There's only one of you watching, so it is what it is. Um, I'm one generation removed from revolutionaries. Like I'm dead serious. One generation removed from revolutionaries. Um, you know, mom, basically transitioned from being involved with the Panthers when everything went down in the late 70s and adopted me. Uncle was involved in the Panthers and stuff. So I'm one generation removed from revolutionaries. And so when I see a lot of these hyper online white leftist kids start talking the revolution shit and then do a lot of this jockeying and posturing and shit and talking about burn it down, and then they start talking crazy, I'm sitting there like, my uncle would have slapped the shit out of you, dog, for talking to him like that in real life. Like there is a difference between the revolutionaries, the generation revolutionaries that are out in the street, and the online leftists that we see right now. And there are activists right now. And a lot of times when you engage with the activists who are out in the street, there's a level of, in the activist community, there's a level of pragmatism that goes along with their leftist politic. And so it is tethered to a real world ideology and real world application, as opposed to the hyper online people who have never taken that out into the street, and they are just sitting there barking online. I'm all over the place, y'all. My brain is kind of going right now. This is later than I'm normally used to be on. So when black folks push back against online leftists, the shit turns combative really fast, and they get sideways with you fast. Um, the problem is you cannot build solidarity with a group of marginalized people by ignoring why they are marginalized, and it has more to do, and it can't just be reduced down to class, because your class your experience in your class is absolutely shaped by your race. Conversation I had earlier with my boy Fearless, talking about the difference. We're talking about JD Vance and the hillbilly elegy stuff, or eulogy, or whatever. I think it's eulogy, whatever. Anyway, the hillbilly, the book he wrote, where he cosplayed as a poor person in his book. And we're talking about the difference between being white and broke and poor in Appalachia, and being black and broke in Appalachia. And those are vastly different experiences. Yeah, it sucks being poor, white, and living in Appalachia, but it sucks more because you're black and poor in Appalachia. It's a different experience. Race does change the experience. You can't just reduce it down to a class argument. And the other side is, for a long time, and I know people don't like to hear this, but the white working class were kind of the foot soldiers, depending on what part of the country you were in. They were kind of the foot soldiers to enforce white supremacy. Like, they were the ones that were out, the bodies, the physical people that were out there in the lynch mobs and everything. It might have been organized or greenlit by some person that had means, some white person that had means, but a lot of the people that were foot soldiers of that, and the overseer class of people, they were white working class folks. And I know it was intentional, and I know it was used to prevent solidarity, but it still happened. And so you cannot remove race from the class discussion. And I think that causes a lot of tension, because the online left, the white online left, a lot of these cats, and this is just my personal experience. It's what I've experienced. Is from people I know personally. There's a very specific archetype here. You have white kid grew up middle class, or upper lower middle class, whatever. Parents were Republicans, conservatives, or whatnot. They're rebelling against parents, and so they find ideology that is diametrically opposed in their mind, and they fervently lock in on that specific ideology, and they become zealous about that ideology to the point where they won't even allow any other people's experience to shape it on, and they become the loudest, most combative foot soldiers of that ideology. And a lot of it is tethered to not wanting to be like their parents. Sorry. Um, and it's not broad brush strokes. I'm not saying all of it, but that is kind of my experience. And so what we see is defeat. There's a lot of there's a sense of defensiveness when whiteness is brought up, even if people consider themselves progressive. When you talk about, um, you know, have you thought that you could be perceiving this through a white centric lens? I've seen leftists get infuriated with that, and it's like, I'm not accusing anything, not even impugning your progressiveness. I'm just asking, have you filtered this through another lens besides your own? Okay. And so it shows up with over-explaining, reframing the conversation, and shutting down all nuance. Like, instantly, you're shit lib, rad lib. The idea that black people are the establishment is crazy. But I've seen that argument specifically on threads. Like, any black person that disagrees with you, if you're on the left, I've seen it where they instantly say, "Oh, you're a rad lib, you're a shit lib." It's like, no, I'm actually on. I agree with most of the shit you saying, bro, but I just don't like how black people are presented or framed in your argument, or it feels like it's not even considering us in your argument. And so it's like, I'm left in a way like I put my I've been involved in protests and the activism side of shit, done that shit, done that side of things. I've seen how it works. Um, some of these little dudes that are hyper online leftists, they got a picture of Marx as their avatar, whatnot. They ain't never been out anywhere. They ain't never really done this, applied this in the real world. So a lot of what they're working with is theory. Okay. Um, they'll critique power until somebody points out where they sit in the seat of power, and then instantly it's a problem. Okay. But yes, I've seen a lot of cats that are coming from the conservative background. It's kind of like an act of rebellion, and so they're gonna go harder in the paint than anybody else in that space. All right. I don't want to spend my entire night talking about this. So I'm skipping a lot of this. I will circle back to this because I talked about it this morning. Let's talk about shit that's fun. So I'm rereading The Dark Tower. And I'm on the drawing of the three. And I've read the drawing of the three a couple of different times. This time I decided I'm gonna read it and listen to the audiobook. And after listening to the audiobook, I think I may put down the book version and just focus on the audiobook because audiobook adds layers of nuance to conversations and inflection that you don't get when you're reading, if that makes sense, specifically with the person that is presenting this audiobook. I don't know what the gentleman's name is, but the drawing of the three on Audible, I do really enjoy the person that is reading the book because he adds inflections and stuff that I did not pick up on when I was actually just reading the text in the book. Okay. And so the part I'm on, we've gone through the initial part of the drawing of the three where Roland is introduced to the prisoner. He ends up meeting Eddie, and they have their misadventures. Me ends up kind of saving Eddie, and now we're on to the part where they're about to meet Odetta. Um, and so that's the part I'm on, and I'm really enjoying it. The nuances I'm picking up on, specifically, Stephen King was really in his bag, with his descriptions, where they didn't really feel forced, and you could really visualize what he's talking about. He's really in his bag with this one. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I'm fearful that I'm gonna get into this Odetta thing and start cringing, because the one thing, I see Stephen King, I love his books and everything. When he writes black characters and the way that black characters talk, bro, it's and so we're gonna see how this goes with her. Because you have the Odetta Walker character and the duality of her both sides of her, and so we'll see what happens. But I'm enjoying it so far. I'm enjoying. I don't want to say reread. It's almost like a re-listen to it. Um, I'm really having a good time with the book. Like I said, I'm reading the book and listening to the ebook at the same time. I may put down the book and just focus on the ebook just so that I can get through this part of it. Okay. Um, but I like Eddie, the way that the narrator has Eddie. He really captures kind of the brisk New York cadence, and kind of the the fast talking nature of him and the charm that he has. And he really did capture. I think Stephen King really did draw a lot of his addiction experiences and his, how the experiences that he had as an addict. I think he was able to really draw from those. Um, and use those to color the character of Eddie. I think that there's some specific nuances in there and just turns of phrase that seem to be super super familiar to somebody that's battled addiction. And so I almost feel like he's speaking from a place of internal knowledge. And so that's what I'm left on with the Eddie Dean character. Again, we're just now meeting Odetta Walker, and we're going to see what happens. Because I know Detta is different than Odetta, and so, like I said, Stephen King gonna get into some of the weird, problematic phrasing of how Black people talk. So we're gonna see how that goes. Um, what stands out is Eddie, and I'm not trying to spoil it for too much, but Eddie is an addict who's street smart and street savvy, and he has introspection, but his introspection was really tied to a devotion to his older brother. and that really impacted, um, it limited him. And the way that it came about where he got dropped into Roland's world, um, he didn't really necessarily choose it. It was kind of foisted upon him. Um, and so he had to adjust, and basically cold turkey heroin in an alien world. Um, but he was put in an environment where he had to function differently, and he stepped up. And it kind of shows the character that he's going to be, where Eddie's turning into in this book, where he ends up becoming basically Roland's right hand, um, and somebody that can improvise on the fly and adjust. And so I'm really interested, and like I said, it's fun experiencing the story again. Um, like I said, The Dark Tower is one of my favorite books, one of my favorite series, and it's one of the ones I keep coming back to. There's a couple of fiction books I keep coming back to, like The Spook Who Sat by the Door by Sam Greenlee, um, um, Dark Tower by, or not Dark Corner by Brandon Massey, who is one of my favorite writers. I read everything Brandon Massey drops. Um, and then the Dark Tower series. And those are like my favorite works of fiction. And a lot of Kurt Vonnegut stuff. Like there's so much Kurt Vonnegut stuff I can't even, like, I've read a lot of Kurt Vonnegut stuff. But it is interesting to see. And the entire thing, it was really interesting watching Eddie trying to mask his way through um craving a fix. Like he was masking on the airplane and trying to be normal. And a lot of times when you're trying to mask in real life, you think you're being as normal as possible, but sometimes people can see that you're not. And so it's really kind of interesting to see. Okay. So um I'm interested, and like I said, I'm gonna keep giving you guys updates. When I get done with the drawing of the three, we'll have an episode where we do an entire spoilers review of it, and kind of rate it in terms of where I think it sits upon the other Dark Tower books. And so I'm looking forward to that. And then I will be having the characters issues, because here's the thing. In this book, we're going to get introduced to, I believe, the drawing of three. I think we're going to get introduced to all three of them. So it's going to be Eddie, Jake, and Susanna slash Odetta Walker. And so I will be doing character issues on each character. Um, and I'm trying to decide if I'm going to do it for the whole story or just the part of the book, like just the part of the book I'm existing in. But I think I'll do a characters issue for each character. And yes, it's going to have spoilers in it. So if you haven't picked up The Dark Tower, go cop it. It's been out for a long, long time. The eighth book, I mean, The Wind Through the Keyhole, has been out for the gang of time. You can go get that one. Okay. I'm gonna skip this one talking about parenting kids with ADHD. Um, and I think I'm gonna I'm gonna put a pin in that one and come back to that one next week, because there's some specific things I want to say, but my brain is not thinking in a straight line. My meds are starting to wear off for the evening, y'all. Like I said, I'm medicated for ADHD, and there comes a point where I end up reaching the end of my attention, and I'm kind of at the end of my attention for the day, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's how I naturally wind down for the evening. But once you get familiar with it, you kind of manage the ebbs and flows of it. So I do appreciate y'all tuning in. Um, I do have a couple weeks ago I talked about no third spaces being available for young people, and I'm working on creating something for some nerds, a third space for nerdy kids and nerdy adults. And so once I get things up and running, um, hopefully, I can create a space for like a real life brick and mortar place where nerds could come, hang out, pursue their dreams and hobbies and interests, um, and be, even if they're in the content creation space, record themselves and start building out their voice or whatnot. So have something I'm building, and I'm not going to talk about it too much, because I believe if you end up talking about all your plans, you never go through and implement any of them. So you're just going to start seeing me, and you may start seeing this live stream take place from there. So I'm just kind of prepping you for that kind of stuff. So anyway, I do appreciate y'all. Thanks for tuning in, and I will catch y'all next week. Peace.